International Christian Embassy Jerusalem is your embassy in the heart of Israel, founded in 1980. From our headquarters in Jerusalem through our branches in over 80 nations and yours in Canada, we seek to challenge the church to take up its scriptural responsibility, to remind Israel of the promises made to her in the Bible, and to be a source of practical assistance to all the people in the land of Israel. On today's program, author and Pastor Giulio Gabeli shares his testimony. And we continue the discussion with members of the Inside Israel team.
Pastor Gabeli, it's wonderful to have this opportunity to interview you.
Thank you, Christine. It's great to be here with you.
You are considered a Messianic minister. People often don't know your history, your ancestry within the Jewish heritage, particularly that came from the Italian side, which has a very strong presence in terms of the Jews that were once there and that still are there.
Within the Jewish diaspora, there were the Sephardic Jews as well as the Ashkenazi Jews. The Ashkenazi Jews are generally referred to as the Eastern European and Russian Jews. And the Sephardic Jews are the Jews that actually came from Sepharad, which is actually mentioned in Obadiah verse 19 and 20. And Sepharad is actually the Hebrew name for the modern day name of Spain. In fact, according to the scriptures, there was a colony in Tarshish. And Tarshish, historically speaking, is actually a place in ancient Spain or Sepharad. The Bible makes it very clear that there was a time when the Jews that went to Spain under King Solomon, when he would send ships to Tarshish, and they would return every 3 years, he talked about bringing back apes and gold and silver. Now, my ancestors actually are, well, they come from Sepharad. They come from Spain. And the Jews, the Sephardic Jews, are the Jews that actually inhabit the Mediterranean, the western and southern areas of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, as far as Italy is concerned, many of the Jews in Italy are predominantly from Sepharad or Sephardic Jews. My family line actually moved all the way from Livorno, from Spain to Livorno, which was in the north, where there was a very significant Jewish community, and moved all the way down to Syracuse, Sicily, which has an actual history of 3,200 years as a city, one of the most ancient cities of the world. I was born on the outskirts of Syracuse, Sicily. Now, my grandparents at that time were very assimilated into Italian culture, but never able to fully deny our Jewish background and culture. During the time of the Second World War, when the Nazis realized that the government of Mussolini had fallen, they did everything possible to round up the Italian Jews and send them off to Auschwitz and Dachau and so on. But the Italians spared 80% of the Jews of Italy. In fact, Yad Vashem confirms that 80% of the Italian Jews were actually saved by the Italians themselves. Now, my grandparents were out in the countryside when the Nazis came and rounded up. They found 90 of the Sicilian Jewish men, as well as some of the other family members, and just shot them right there and then. But my grandparents happened to be out in the countryside. They did not go back into the city of Ragusa, where that took place. And so we were spared. My father was a little boy at the time. And of course, this is the hand and the mercy of God in sparing us as a family right back then. Now, coming to Canada, we immigrated to Canada in the 1960s. And growing up in the city of Toronto was quite interesting for us. We were, as I said, assimilated into the Italian culture, but always remembering our Jewish background and kind of knowing a little bit of the history of where we were coming from. But it was there that we came to know Yeshua as our Lord and Savior.
How did that process happen? Was it through your parents first?
Yes. In fact, my mother was the first one that gave her heart to Christ. My dad was a little resistant at first, and it was not long after that he actually saw these believers that were gathering in a home, reading the scriptures, and worshiping Yeshua, worshiping Jesus. It was not long after that that he made a decision to follow Christ as well. But even myself, I was much younger then. I was an adolescent at the time. And so my life took on a totally different direction at that time as we were growing up within the church, the evangelical church. And of course, we acknowledged as we continued to grow and continued to mature that God had a plan and purpose and destiny for us, because obviously who we are in our DNA very often lays out for us our future direction and course. And so it became very apparent to us as we were serving the Lord, having been called into the ministry, that God had a plan and purpose for us to actually become a bridge between the Jewish community as well as the Christian community. And that has been for us, that's been something that the Lord has obviously shown us, and that the Lord has obviously allowed us to move into through the years.
Historically, it's fascinating the way the Jews were protected in Italy. Any theories or information about why this happened, particularly in that location?
During the Second World War, Mussolini and the Italian fascist government wanted a relationship with Hitler. They were allies of Nazi Germany, but it was for the purpose of somehow, world conquest and domination. But anti-Semitism was considered by the Italians, generally speaking, they referred to it as the German disease. That's just a phrase that they used. And generally speaking, the Italians are a very compassionate people. And because of the history and the presence of the Jewish community within Italy, which is over 2,000 years, actually. In fact, the only city in Europe that did not experience an expulsion of the Jews was actually Rome. In fact, the great synagogue of Rome that still exists there today is over 2,000 years old. It's one of the oldest synagogues in the world outside of Israel. And there's just a relationship that the Italians had with the Jews that was very, very, very good. They just right throughout history, generally speaking, even though you had the Vatican and you had many of the Crusades that actually were sent out from Rome, but throughout history, generally speaking, the Jewish people were embraced and very much a part of Italy, and always maintained a presence in many of the northern cities, central cities of Italy, even down into the island of Sicily, right through the years.
Now, Pastor Gabeli, a lot of what you've already discussed, it's written in your book, Grafted In. And as the name implies, this is about Christians being grafted in to the fold of, and the link with Judaism. I'm going to start at the very politically incorrect point, replacement theology, because this flies right in the face of replacement theology and indicating from the title that we are indeed, as Christians, grafted in. Explain that concept, if you will. Okay.
So once again, the scriptures make it very clear that Gentile believers have been grafted in. And what is wonderful is to see, obviously, that God's plan and purpose was to bring Gentile believers right into the very citizenship of Israel. In our personal context, my mother is Italian. My father is Jewish Italian. And so I believe in one way that God has uniquely positioned us to be that bridge, to understand what it means to see the grafted in promise of God, Gentile believers being grafted into the very citizenship, into the very household, into the very family of Israel. So, it's quite exciting for me as I am today fulfilling my call and purpose, where God has called me to be a voice, where I can connect with, I can relate to our Jewish community, and yet, on the same token, as a Christian minister, I understand the fullness of God's plan and purpose to bring Jew and Gentile believers together.
This word that you use, bridge, is extremely important right now. Western society is very familiar with the concept of replacement theology. We've seen some of the churches that they espouse that. Unfortunately, they attack Israel, boycotts and divestments, calling it an apartheid state, and so forth. So this has been in the news. But on the other side, in terms of the Jewish side, so I'm talking to your Jewish side now, where Christianity is seen as a threat based on the history of anti-Semitism through the Second World War, and that still exists today, and that we see in many of the churches. I'd like to know how you serve as a go-between there, particularly when some Jews see us as a problem. They see us as out to usurp Jewish identity, about proselytizing in Israel, which again is seen as a usurping of Jewish identity. How do you contend with that particular side of the equation?
Well, I think there seems to be confusion within the Jewish community, even among themselves, because there are some that view their Jewishness as being a religion as opposed to it being a biological DNA. And because of that, there are those that feel that to be Jewish means you need to be an observant Jew following the principles of Judaism or halakha, Jewish law. And so if you are a Jew and you are not attending a synagogue, or you are not part of an observant tradition, then how can you say that you are a Jew and yet you're a Christian? Now, what they fail to realize is that you can be a believer in Yeshua and still have a biological DNA that comes from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, in fact, our Jewishness is in no way disqualified because one believes in Yeshua. And because I'm a follower of Yeshua does not mean that I cannot relate to or understand the Jewish community. Now, on a personal level, what has at times been challenging, especially for some of the older folks in the Jewish community, is because of their experiences in the past with Christianity, or better yet, Christendom, and the problems that were actually created because of the Holocaust, the pogroms, or going back in history, the Spanish Inquisition, and all the trouble that has taken place. You know, the moment that they see someone that has become a Christian, quote unquote, they see that as a betrayal. How could you become a Christian when Christianity, or under the sign of the cross, we were being persecuted, we were being killed, raped, and pillaged, and hated? And so they see that as a betrayal. Now, that's some of the older crowd because they've experienced the abuses and they've experienced, obviously, the troubles that have taken place throughout history. But I find that many of the younger generation Jews, many of them may not even be as observant any longer. And so they don't seem to have this dichotomy. They do understand that obviously there's also been intermarriage. There have been Jews that are secular. They're only Jewish in name, and they would identify themselves as being part of the Jewish community, but they're not observant Jews. They're not following through with all that is required of the law. And so there's a greater acceptance there. But as a Christian minister, I find that especially in public venues, when there are Jewish Christian elements together, for example, when we're promoting a strong advocacy for the state of Israel, or we're welcoming a delegation from Israel, or there's a member of parliament, I find that very often the Jewish and Christian community recognize how important it is that we walk together, that we stand together. And so they've embraced me as one of theirs, but in some ways I'm still a Christian minister, but we're walking together for the sake of the state of Israel, and that is actually a very positive thing.
I'll tell you, you're an inspiration to me, and I'm sure to our viewers. And once again, look for Pastor Gabeli on other episodes. It's been a privilege.
Behold, he who guards Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not harm you during the day, nor the moon during the night.
Welcome back to Inside Israel in part 2 of our discussion. In fact, we're not really having a discussion as such, we're more having a dialogue, because with me is the Executive Director of ICEJ Canada, Donna Holbrook, and her sister, Bonnie Traversy, who is our Western Director, and I'm the Public Affairs and Media Consultant. So we're having a little discussion about what we do at ICEJ in terms of serving the Jewish community. I'm going to start off actually by talking about, because there are many of you watching that may not even know how ICEJ even got on the map, and I think this is really important because back in 1980, when it was announced that Jerusalem would be the capital, the eternal capital of Israel, which of course is fitting given the history, there were embassies that got angry. 13 of them left.
So the embassies left because of a threat of an oil embargo, and so they were concerned about that. So they moved out of Jerusalem, and it was a Canadian Christian couple who were over in Israel celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, Merv and Merla Watson, who were there. And so they were there with some other couples, Merv, Jay and Meridell Rawlings, and some other couples, and they were celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, and they decided we need to have a Christian embassy based here, and it's been incredible what has emerged since. We're talking, 37 years now?
37 years ago,
and
1980.
Over 80 nations in the world. We're partnering with so many aid projects over there. We've brought home over 150,000 Jews back to Israel and helped them to get assimilated. And so, yes, it's
And I promised last week to talk about, the Christian-Jewish dialogue, but one thing very important too is that we deal also with Muslims.
Yes.
In our in the ministry. We are very pro all of people. We support people as a mandate of the Christian faith to love one another. This is something we do. But in terms of the outreach to the Jewish people, this is something, Donna, that you have absorbed your life with this ministry, being the national director, the executive director. And I'd like to hear some of your experiences with this, because, we know that at times there has been, and there still exists, a bit of a trust factor. And again, I touched on that last week with Christians, their history of anti-Semitism. How has it been for you with your outreach to the Jewish community?
I would say it's highly favorable. The branch in Canada did close in 2001, and I found myself really appreciating the ministry of ICEJ, and I felt there must be something that can be done to keep it active in Canada, because it had been here for 20 years. So I stepped in and took on everything in 2001. And as I said, in 1996, I had already been to Israel. And so my heart level was already there. And I also went to the Jewish community because that was my closest thing to Israel, and there was much to learn there. And I even learned Hebrew for a time, but I had to give it up because I had this responsibility. So I am in the Jewish community quite a lot because I desire to. The approach has generally been very welcoming. I believe that for those who already knew ICEJ over the last 20 years before I took over, that our scriptural mandate is to bless and bring comfort to Israel. It's Isaiah 40 verse 1, comfort ye, my people. So there was already, I think, I was welcomed and to a great degree embraced. There wasn't anything that I found hardly ever that was contrary to any suspicion, or because our mandate is clear. There's nothing that we're doing other than bringing the love of Yeshua to everyone. And my role is in Canada. That's a big role because it's geographically very large. Population-wise, not so much. That's why Bonnie's my West Regional. She's doing a great outreach in the 4 Western provinces. Mm-hmm. So I have served on many Jewish boards. 7 years with CIC, with the Canadian Society of Yad Vashem, there with Israel on TV, and I have an interest there with Honest Reporting Canada. There's much that we can contribute to. In fact, there was a tendency within these Jewish boards to say, of interest to the Jewish community. I said, wait a minute, could we not call this a pro-Israel community? Because you've got to understand, and I'd be on grassroots group for fighting anti-Semitism, and they would still go around, like going around that mountain. They felt that you could see the tendency to rely on themselves and not to go outside of there. But there were things that we could do, and we're prepared to do as Christians, to come alongside, like Jonathan to David. You know, we're friends of the Jewish people, and there needs to be, because they're being targeted all the time and misrepresented in the media and elsewhere, that it's our responsibility as Christians to know that there's a lot of respect and appreciation that we have towards the Jewish people.
Well, the Christian ethic is one of love and acceptance, and we're quite aware, or we should be as Christians, because sadly enough, replacement theology does not espouse that.
No.
But as Christians, we realize we are grafted in, and I mentioned that previously. But what you said there about the Jews being targeted, this is something that really resonated with me. Mm-hmm. There was one issue, too, that really appealed to me when I first met you, Donna, with ICEJ, because I've had people come, some Jewish people that might say, look, what's in it for you Christians? Why are you doing this? And one thing about ICEJ, there are no strings attached. Some people say, well, maybe it's proselytizing. That's not what we do. That's not our practice. We just give love. That's how it was founded, and that's what we do. Give love to the Jewish people. Why? Because it's part of the Christian heritage. We're grafted in. And not just that, from my perspective, it's a justice issue. If people do their research and realize this little tiny Jewish nation is being constantly attacked, it's appalling. And so I applaud. I applaud what we're doing here, what the two of you are consistently doing in the outreach.
And educating within the churches, because after we do a seminar within a church, all we need is a host church. We go in and no charge, and we present this history, the founding fathers, and what happened during the Second World War, what happened during the Holocaust. People, pastors, don't even know this, and they want the materials. And people go away, well, gee, we've never heard this before. Where can we get more information? So
yes.
we are educating within the churches as we're invited to, and bringing people to Israel is the first thing I want to do. And also the scholarship for our young adults. How can they study the Bible, teach from the Bible, become heads of like youth pastors and senior pastors and maybe superintendents of their denomination and never be in the land of the Bible? That's why we did the scholarship. And it was actually a Jewish entity, the CIC, who had funds to do this mission, and we came up with the program, and we've been able to offer this, thankfully. We're running short on funds right now, but to bring young adults, Christian young adult pastors, to bring them, like Verone, and we've had so many who have come on the program, and it really transforms their lives. Actually, with the young people, it is deeply transformative on a personal level. They come back seeing life differently. They're making clearer decisions, and I would say more godly decisions for their lives. And it is a wonderful thing from my end to see this happen.
Well, and you too have done a lot of outreach in the Christian community, attended conferences, taught at them. What's your experience been?
For the most part, I'm finding that the Christian audience is pretty, I'd say, ignorant, unknowledgeable with regard to the importance about our history with the Jewish people. And when we have the opportunity to go into the churches and do seminars and teach, there is a hunger. They get hungry for it, and they want to hear more. That's because we do such a good job anyway.
I agree. And the Jewish culture is wonderful. It's very rich, it's personable, it's questioning, it's Christians benefit just from knowing.
We've even had
culture.
The president of a synagogue. They will sit in on our sessions in the churches, and they applaud us like they haven't heard this either. I love bringing people together, because if we start to understand and take a meal together, we start talking together, and when we send our young adults over, they would have like a Shabbat dinner. And one of our gals from the Filipino church, Danica, she started to sing one of their songs, and they said, "What? In Hebrew?" right? Like what? You're Canadian, you're Filipino, you're Christian. What do you know about us? And she said, well, we do this. Like this is we learn how to do your dances, we sing your songs, and they thought, whoa, And then I think you dispel the myths, the misperceptions about one another. I think the Jewish people would think that we only read from the New Testament. Some may. You won't get the full story if you do.
Certainly not.
So it's a beautiful thing, and they want to spend time together.
And the first Shabbat meal that I ever went to, I was blown away by it because of the questioning, the inquiry, the open discussion, one to another, discussing the philosophies of Scripture, questioning, and doing it brazenly, because I know that some Christian groups don't think you should ever question God, but God knows your heart anyway. Mm-hmm. So you might as well ask your questions and work it out together. This was encouraging because the young people are also at the table and they're learning and they're exploring together. It's fantastic. Thank you both so much.
We conclude our program today with some sights and sounds within Israel. In consideration of Canada's 150th birthday, please consider 150 ways to bless Israel through your Christian embassy, the ICEJ Canada. Consider becoming a $150 monthly donor. Plant 150 trees, 150 prayers for Israel. The opportunities are endless. Please contact us. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. Through your contribution to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk, Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield, Bomb-Proof Shelters, Shoulder to Shoulder, Alias Support, Bet Singer Children's Home, Israel in Crisis, ICEJ Communication Media Fund, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Magen David Adom Emergency Services, Canada Israel Young Adult Scholarship, Equip and Teach, Bet Rachel Strauss Inclusive Community, Gift, Estate, and Securities Funds.